Adrian Kempe and Drew Doughty return to the ice in the Four Nations face-off. How did they do? We'll talk about that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Coming up on today's show, we've got another trade target to tell you about for the LA Kings potentially, as the trade deadline is coming up next month, and the Ontario Reign played a game tonight. We'll give you an update on how they did as well. But we're going to start with one of the most highly anticipated hockey days outside of the Stanley Cup playoffs we've had in a while. We had a pair of marquee rivalry matchups in the Four Nations face-off, with a pair of LA Kings involved in each game. We'll start with what was looked at as the warm-up game, as Nordic rivals clashed with Sweden and King star Adrian Kempe taking on Finland. Kempe was coming off a very eventful game in the opener for for Sweden. He was involved in that 4-3 overtime loss against pre-tournament favorite Canada. Kempe was, if not the best, one of the best players on the ice, maybe the best player for Sweden, had a big goal and also had a hit on Canadian defenseman Shea Theodore that knocked the Vegas Golden Knights player out of the rest of the tournament. Not that that was a dirty play by any stretch, but it was a play of note in that game. Unfortunately, Kempe did not have nearly as eventful of a game in the second game for Sweden as he did in the opening game. Saturday, though, he very nearly won the game in overtime. He had a strong move to the net. Puck just slid through the crease, and then Finland immediately took the puck down the ice in the overtime and scored the game-winning goal. Finland with the 4-3 overtime win over Adrian Kempe and Sweden, in what was a very, very good game. As for Adrian Kempe, didn't have a point, finished a -1. 3 shots on goal, also had 3 hits, 15 minutes and 57 seconds of ice time. He wasn't bad in the game, but not quite as good as he was in the opening game. So up next for Kempe and Sweden, a big game against the United States on Monday. Speaking of the U.S., the main event on Saturday was the highly anticipated matchup and possible championship game preview between the USA and Canada, with LA's Drew Doughty playing defense for our neighbors to the north. It would be Drew Doughty that would have the more eventful game in between Kempe and Doughty in this one. And I did want to mention something. I talked about this briefly on our Friday fan feedback show. We had an email, and I was responding to something, and I mentioned the booing of the national anthems, which Canadian fans have been doing during this event anytime the U.S. anthem has been played, and it is over politics. And they did it again before this USA-Canada game, which was expected. And I had said, regardless of my politics and regardless of whether those people may be sour justifiably about some things, I am not a fan of booing national anthems. And I'll say the same thing for when the tournament shifts to Boston coming up next week. I'm sure the Boston fans are going to boo the Canadian anthem because of a response to what the Canadian fans are doing, and I'm not in favor of that either. I really think you should be respectful of the other team's anthems, and the players on the ice have no say in tariffs or anything like that. I get it to a point, but for me personally, I'm not a fan of it. I think you should be respectful of all the anthems. That said, the booing of the U.S. anthem before this game got me going a little bit. It got my blood flowing. And if you were wondering about the emotions, the physical play, and how much players were going to care about playing in this event, those certainly have been answered. As I am wearing, by the way, my old Team USA hockey jersey as we were doing this, if you're watching on YouTube. So if you didn't see the start of this game, And who knows if the booing was a part of that, if maybe it got the U.S. team's blood going. But we had 3 fights within a minute, within the first few seconds of this game. 3 different fights right off the opening faceoff, right off the next faceoff, and then shortly after the following faceoff. 3 fights in this game, and I think that got everyone's blood going. People in the arena, people watching on TV, whether you're in Canada or you're in the U.S., that was something to be sure. As for the game, Canada would take the early lead, and Drew Doughty would play a big hand in that first goal. Drew made a really nice pass out of his own zone to a Connor McDavid flying at full speed, taking the puck into the zone and scoring an absolutely gorgeous goal to make it 1-0. And was weird to see Drew Doughty setting up Connor McDavid for a goal, considering the history between those two teams. But the U.S. would tie it up later at 1 apiece. And before the end of the first period, Drew Doughty put a pretty big hit on Jack Hughes of the U.S., and then Brady Tkachuk of the U.S. responded with a huge hit on Drew Doughty, who went hard in the boards, landed on the ice, but he popped right back up and thankfully seemed to be completely okay. But we've talked about the fear of injury in this event. We've seen some injuries already. But again, if people were wondering how serious the players were going to take this event and these games, that was just another small example. But thankfully, Drew Doughty was okay on that one. Now, in the second period, the U.S. would score to take the lead, and Drew Doughty sort of had a hand in it, kind of. He and his defensive partner, Thomas Harley, who just joined the team due to injury and illness on the Canadian roster, they both went off on a line change. And unfortunately for Canada, it was right as Sidney Crosby turned the puck over. It led to a 2-on-1 for the U.S. Dylan Larkin would score, and the U.S. would grab a 2-1 lead. How much of that was Doughty's fault? Was it his defensive partner's fault? Was it Crosby's fault for turning it over? Maybe a little bit of bad luck and bad timing for the Canadian team. Good luck and good fortune for the U.S. team. And again, the United States would take the 2-1 lead, and that would be the final. The United States did add an empty net goal, 3-1. They get the win and improved to 2-0 in the tournament. Canada dropped to 1-1, and they're tied with Sweden and Finland, all with 2 points. So the U.S. has advanced to the championship game because of that win, and it could be Canada, it could be Sweden, it could be Finland as their opponent. All of them, again, have 2 points. Canada is playing Finland on Monday, and if they win that game in regulation, they will have a rematch with the United States for the championship. And I have to say, so far through this tournament, I think this is going to end up being a good thing for Drew Doughty. Maybe not so much of a good thing for Adrian Kempe. I think Juice could have really used probably 2 weeks of rest to get him going for the rest of the stretch run for the LA Kings and into the playoffs. Although if you asked him, this has been such a cool event, I'm pretty sure he's not going to have any regrets. But as for Drew Doughty, he said in the opening game against Sweden that it was the fastest game he has ever played in. And I don't think he was just saying that because it's a high level of play and because he's been, he's missed so much of the regular season. I think he was saying it because it was just that high level of a game. And the U.S.-Canada game was just as fast, if not more so. So the point is, I think this hockey, this very high level of hockey, I think it's a good thing for Drew. I really do. I think, and he's played well, I think, so far on these first 2 games for Canada. Probably better than I thought he would. So I think this is a good thing for Drew, and I think subsequently it's a good thing for Drew and the Kings for him to get ready for some important hockey as we go down the stretch. And I know that some of you may not be into this event as much as I am and other people are, and that's fine. But I just want to say, as a hockey fan, I think this has been great. I was on a Locked On Squad show this past week before the Four Nations face-off, and the other hosts of the show were not quite as enthusiastic as I was about this. I was probably the one that was actually saying I'm kind of looking forward to this event. I will admit I was a little curious about how the players were going to play. Talked about it. Were they going to be invested in this? Were they going to play hard? Were they going to hit? And those questions, like I said, have been answered. The players have really played hard in this event. I thought it would be somewhere between regular season hockey and playoff hockey. there have been some playoff hockey level games in this. It's been that good and it's been that competitive. And hopefully we do, with all due respect to Sweden and Finland, hopefully we see a U.S.-Canada rematch in the championship on Thursday. But if you missed out on this so far, I really recommend it. It's been some really, really great hockey and just really entertaining stuff. All right. We have been doing some trade targets, talking about players that the LA Kings might be looking to target with the upcoming trade deadline coming up. We're going to talk about another player coming up, and that's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place for you to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, and even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action at any point. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel has live betting, and it keeps you invested in every part of the game, whether you're looking for your team to post a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet or can make $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, the NBA on the brain. Not really. The NHL trade deadline. The NHL trade deadline is March the 7th, 3 p.m. Eastern time. We are 20 days away as of recording this show, and we have been looking at some potential trade targets for the LA Kings. And I've been focusing on players who seem to be what the Kings are looking for. Right wingers, right shot. They can help the Kings offensively, help them on the power play. But I've also been looking at players that I would call realistic trade targets. We haven't talked about the big names out there. We haven't talked about Mitch Marner, the Maple Leafs, or Mikko Rantanen, now the Hurricanes. Those guys are right wingers. Those guys are right shots. Those guys would definitely help out the Kings offense. They would definitely help out the power play. But I think those are also pretty unrealistic targets. It's not impossible, but the Kings would have to make some pretty significant changes to their roster, or they would have to sacrifice some of the few big-time prospects they have in their system. They'd have to part with maybe first-round draft picks, and then they would have to re-sign Mitch Marner and Mikko Rantanen. And those are two guys that are going to command $14 to $15 million a year. It's likely out of the Kings' price range right now. So we've talked about players like Rickard Rakell, the Pittsburgh Penguins, Brock Besser, the Vancouver Canucks, Kyle Palmieri of the New York Islanders, and Oliver Bjorkstrand of the Seattle Kraken. Now, those players could help the Kings, and I think they're more realistic options. But today, we're going to kind of meet halfway. We're going to talk about a player that is not a Marner or a Rantanen, but is probably a step above the Bjorkstrands, the Bessers, the Palmieris, and the Rickard Rakells. And this comes from a friend of the show, Carl Balikian of the Hockey News, who has been a guest with us, covers the LA Kings, and he suggested Jonathan Marchessault. That is a player the Kings should be interested in. And I actually like this idea a lot. Now, Marchessault's 34. He is a native of Cap Rouge, Quebec. He is a right winger. He is a right shot. And he's on a team that is likely going to be a seller at the trade deadline, and that is the Nashville Predators. Now, he's not a UFA after this season. Matter of fact, he is signed for the next 3 seasons, and I mentioned he is 34, but his salary is reasonable, $5.5 million per season. So that fits in line with the other players we've been talking about. He's been playing right wing on the Predators' top line, and he is on their #1 power play unit. 54 games this season. After a really slow start, he has 17 goals and 44 points. His career high in power play goals is 9. He's got 4 so far this season. 12 years in the NHL. He has played for the Lightning and the Golden Knights, a couple of pretty successful franchises. He's got 247 career goals and 531 career points in 692 career regular season games. He has been a 20-goal scorer 7 times, a 30-goal scorer twice, and had a career high 48 goals with Vegas in the 2017-18 season. This year, he's on pace for 26 goals, 67 points. He has won a Stanley Cup. He did that with the Golden Knights in 2023, and he was the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for that team as playoff MVP. So obviously, this is a guy who can come up big in the biggest moments. He is a more consistent goal scorer throughout his career than the other guys we've talked about so far. His career high in goals is more than any of the other guys we've talked about so far. And he's been a bigger winner, both individually and as a team, than any of the other guys that we've talked about before. None of those other guys have won a Stanley Cup. None of those other guys have been Conn Smythe Trophy winners. Now, according to puckpedia.com, a little bit confusing. They list him as having a full no movement clause, which means he can't be traded or moved in any way without his consent. But then they also listed him as having a 15-team no trade list. And that's confusing to me because if you have a full no movement clause, why do you need a trade list? Because if you have a full no movement clause, you don't have to have a trade list. It's up to you. You're not going anywhere. So I don't know what's the truth on that. But we'll just say for sure he does have a say in where he wants to go. Now, would he want to come to LA? I don't know. But I will say, a little bit interesting, he left Vegas on bad terms. He did not want to leave the Golden Knights. And he felt that with all he had accomplished, helping them win a cup, winning a Conn Smythe, being a very consistent player for them, one of their original players, that the Golden Knights should have basically signed him for exactly what he was looking for. And apparently they weren't close. And he felt that that was a huge slap in the face to him. He was quoted as saying after he left that that's an organization that has no loyalty to any of the players. And, that it's professional sports. You can argue that there's no loyalty whatsoever. But, look, for a guy who's been as good to the Vegas Golden Knights, I was personally very surprised they did not re-sign him. I was really surprised they let him go because I think he's that good. And I think he was that important to that organization. Now, if he did join the Kings, it would possibly give him a little bit of a chance at revenge against his old team back in the Pacific Division. As it stands right now, it would be the LA Kings against the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round of the playoffs. And that would certainly be a juicy storyline if Jonathan Marchessault was to come to LA and face his old team in the playoffs. Certainly that's not going to be I don't think a huge motivation for Jonathan Marchessault, but it is a nice storyline to mention. There was also some talk about Marchessault potentially coming to LA after Vegas had decided not to sign him. He eventually decided to go to Nashville instead. For what it's worth, his agent is Pat Brisson. And if you don't know, he's like a super agent in hockey. He represents a ton of people. There was some talk that, and Pat Brisson is a very close friend of Luc Robitaille. There was talk that helped Pierre-Luc Dubois become an LA King because he is represented by Pat Brisson. And again, Brisson is a close friend of Luc Robitaille. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Like I said, Brisson represents like 50 guys, and they're all not LA Kings, obviously. So whether there's any truth to that or not, I don't know. Whether that could be a factor in Jonathan Marchessault coming to LA, I don't know. But it's worth mentioning, I suppose. Pat Brisson also, by the way, represents Andrei Kopitar, Alex Turcotte, former King Tyler Toffoli, and a lot of others. But, hey, it couldn't hurt, I suppose, that Pat Brisson and Luc Robitaille are very good friends. Of course, the question is, as always, if you're trading for a player, what is it going to cost? What would Jonathan Marchessault command from other teams, if in fact he even wants to go? Carl Balikian suggested the Kings give up Jordan Spence and a second-round pick for Marchessault. I would do that in a second. I would absolutely do that in a second, but I don't think that's enough. I think that there would be other teams out there willing to give up more than that for Jonathan Marchessault. And I think Nashville would be looking for more than that in return for Jonathan Marchessault. So I'm a fan of Jonathan Marchessault. He's 34, but I still think he has a lot of good hockey in him. He's a consistent goal scorer. He's durable. He's a winner. I'd love to see him in a Kings uniform. I'm not optimistic that would happen, but I will say it's not quite, the Mitch Marner or the Mikko Rantanen. It's not kind of that pipe dream for the LA Kings. I think it's somewhat realistic, maybe not quite as realistic as some of the other players we've talked about, but I like where Caro's coming in that one. I like the suggestion. I think he'd be a good fit for the LA Kings. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But again, it doesn't seem like he has any desire to leave. And if he does have that full no movement clause, obviously that it ends right there. But it is something fun to talk about, which is kind of what this is all about when we talk about potential trades for the LA Kings. The Ontario Reign were in action. We'll let you know how they did. They were north of the border. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Well, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether snacking at your desk or on the road, or you just need a quick protein boost. If you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. And whether you're running between meetings, dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs the protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's give you a quick rain report, and we've got more rain talk coming up on Sunday as well. But the Ontario Reign, the Kings AHL affiliate, was in action on Saturday north of the border against the Calgary Wranglers. And former King and Reign player Martin Frk, you might remember, FRK, he scored. You got to love a guy who has no vowels in his last name. He scored the first goal of the game for Calgary to make it 1-0, and that was the score after one period. Calgary would extend their lead to 2-0 before the Reign would get on the board, thanks to a goal from Sean Element, his 8th of the season. But Martin Frk would respond to make it 3-1 Wranglers. However, the Reign would also respond. Jack Studnicka gets his 13th goal of the season, and the Reign trailed 3-2 going into the third period. Only goal of the third came from Ontario's Charles Hudon, his 17th of the season, and we were tied at 3-3 going into overtime. In OT, Francesco Pinelli of the Reign ended it with his 12th goal of the season. Final score, Reign 4, Wranglers 3. 11 different players had points for the Reign in the win. In net, it was Eric Portillo getting the victory. He allowed 3 goals on 20 shots. He is now 14-5-3 on the season. As for the Reign, they are now 28-14-3 this year for 59 points. That's good enough for third place in the Pacific Division. And with that win over the first place Calgary Wranglers, the Reign are now just 3 points back of Calgary for first in the division. Ontario 7-1-1 in its last 8 games. And if you are looking for more Ontario Reign news, we've got it coming up on our Sunday show. Jared Shaffron, manager of communications and content for the Ontario Reign, and also the play-by-play voice of the Ontario Reign this year, is going to give us a full report on everything that's been going on with the Ontario Reign up to this point. We will certainly ask him about some of the Reign players that you may be more familiar with, guys who have played with the LA Kings this season, like Samuel Helenius and Andre Lee. Talk about how they're doing since they've been sent back down to Ontario. We'll certainly ask him about Samuel Fagimo, and will he get a chance to maybe be with the Kings at some point down the stretch here, and get his thoughts on all things Ontario Reign, looking to an eye towards the LA Kings as well. If you want to stay interactive with the show, want to send us an email for a future show, want to get in on our Friday fan feedback show, the email address lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. Always welcome to post your thoughts if you're watching on the YouTube show in the comments section. Follow us on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We will talk to you on Sunday. And as always, go Kings, go.